Hi, I'm Eyar from the tree, and today we're going to talk about validating configs from code to deployment in the GitOps world. So what is the problem that we're going to cover? Continuous delivery is the goal, and GitOps is the way to achieve that. But being a GitOps organization can be really dangerous. Why is that? Because every config change that is done by the developers can cause a production issue if it's not done correctly. I will show you what I mean. So before the GitOps area, you can go and ask for 1,000 machines. Maybe you do it from your IT department. And then someone will ask you, are you sure you mean 1,000? Maybe you just want 10 and it's some misconfiguration in your ticket? In the GitOps area, you're going to ask for 1,000 machines. And guess what will happen? You're going to get 1,000 machines. No one's going to validate, or no one is going to mention, or ask if it's a mistake. So the question is, how can you delegate your infrastructure as code responsibilities to developers but still sleep well at night? This is what we're going to answer today. So let me tell you about myself. And before I'm doing that, let me also tell you that I'm fully aware that I have bunny ears head. Yes, it's a gimmick. And if you're going to watch the entire session, I promise you that you understand why I'm doing it. So let's go back. Who I am. My name is Eyar. I'm leading the product and co-founder at the tree. I'm one of the organizers of the biggest GitHub community here in Israel. I hate SQL, but I love regex. At the tree, we are helping organizations prevent Kubernetes misconfigurations from reaching production. This is why I interviewed hundreds of developers, DevOps people, SRE, infrastructure, you name it. I talked with so many people that I was able to gather all my insights and write a practical guide about how to find the Yamas carrots. I'm sorry, I promise you, this is the last joke about bunnies. I wrote a practical guide about how to help your developers troubleshoot and avoid infrastructure as code misconfigurations. If you will follow the best practices or follow the guidance that I'm going to show you, I promise you that your developers will be able to troubleshoot by themselves and reduce the number of misconfigurations that they are making, and also will help you sleep better at night. So the framework that we're going to review, I call it VVVV. The VV part is for valid files, valid the schema. The VV part is for make sure that it's following best practices and also your team organization policies. And of course, you always want to automate and shift left. We also cover that, don't worry. So file validation. File validation is basically make sure that the configuration file, which is YAML, JSON, whatever, is correct. I will give an example. This is a YAML file, and it's defining a Kubernetes deployment file. If I try to deploy it into my cluster, it will actually be rejected. This is because it's missing one character. It's have to be 3 instead of 2. And this is what's make it into an invalid YAML file. The tool that I love to use for that is YQ. It's a command line tool that I'm always using to validate my YAML files. And the cool part is that if it will fail, it will show you exactly on your YAML file it's failing and why. Also remember that all JSON files can be converted into YAML, so you can still use the same tool. The next thing that you want to validate is the schema. I'm actually pretty surprised about not a lot of people are doing it, but let's make sure that we're all familiar with what is schema. Schema is to make sure that technology syntax is correct. Let's say I have a YAML file, and this YAML is also happen to be a Kubernetes file. So all the Kubernetes files are YAML files, but not all the YAML files are Kubernetes files. I will explain what I mean. This is a valid YAML file. It's have key and values, but it's not a valid Kubernetes file because I'm not using the right syntax. It's going to be small letters instead of capital letters. Under the hood, schema validation is done with JSON schema definition. Think about it as unit test for your configuration. It's usually done by someone else. You don't want to write it by yourself. and this will make sure that all the properties are set in the right places and are written correctly. It's also usually a built-in option with your existing tools. So with kubectl, the command for doing the schema validation is called run. With Terraform, it's called validate. I think with Elm, it's called check. The majority of tools have it as a built-in option. You should always prefer to use it. The problem is with Kubernetes, there is a bug. Among one of the other bugs that they have on their project, and this bug is defining the problem of using dry run for schema validation. This is why for this particular use case, I'll have to use another tool. It's called kubeconfirm. And if you don't have a built-in option to do the validation, like I said, always prefer to do it with a built-in command. There's another cool project that's called JSON Schema Store. It's basically a hub that people are uploading the JSON schema definition of different technologies, and together with the JSON schema package, which is also open source, you can validate basically every infrastructure as code or every configuration file that you have. If you want to read more about why the kubectl dry run command is not that good to use, feel free to read the article that I wrote and was published on opensource.com, and it's comparing different tools to do the schema validation for Kubernetes. Following best practices. The way that I love to describe it is as lesson learned from other people postmortems. Usually those are industry best practices that will help you with security, stability, cost optimization. For example, in the Kubernetes ecosystem, you want to make sure that all the containers images have a pinned version, because if you're not going to mention the version, it's going to pull the latest one. So every time that you deploy the container, it will pull a different image version. Not a good practice. Or for example, you want to make sure that all the containers have a memory and CPU limit, or that they have an owner label, because you want to do cost allocation and you want to know to which department this specific application belongs to. So for each technology have its own way or tooling for checking if best practices are followed or not. I really like this repository. It's called Static Analysis, and it's basically curating all the different tools for different technologies. So you could go ahead, look for Terraform, Kubernetes, Ansible, whatever, and we show you a list of tooling that will help you with best practices. Don't go and write best practices by yourself. Use what is already out there. Following your team or organization policies. So the way that I love to define it is lesson learned from your own postmortems. If I compare it to best practices, so best practices are something that are shared between organizations, and policies are usually not shared between organizations. Those are usually internal best practices. We can call them like that. It can be something like pull image from a private registry, or for all the AI application, make sure that they have at least 4 gigabyte CPU, because this is what correct for our own team or our own organization. Another example can be make sure that you only use pre-approved ports or namespace or labels or whatever. Those are all stuff that are relevant for a specific business unit or specific organization. So this is why they are called policies and not best practices. The tools and principles to do that is you want to make sure that you have an easy way to write and maintain the policies and rules. There are 2 approaches. You can do it with declarative way. For examples can be JSON or YAML, or you can do it with languages, Node.js, Go, whatever, bashing even. I prefer the declarative way, because if you choose language, let's say you choose Node.js, all the developers that are not familiar with Node.js will not feel comfortable collaborating with you on those rules and policies, and this is something that you do want to happen inside the organization. If you go with the declarative way, it is something that people are more familiar, and therefore they are more tend to collaborate with. You also want to treat your policies like your infrastructure and your code. You want to make sure that you're able to check it in your Git so you can enjoy version controlling, automation, and collaboration. One of the challenges that organizations are encountering when they want to implement policies is how do I do it if I have multiple GitOps projects? I tell you how not to do it. You don't want to copy and paste your policies and put it in each project separately. It will create a mess once you want to update one of the policies, because then you need to go for each project and change the policy. This is not done correctly. The best way to do it is with a centralized solution. You can use console or etcd or any other solution that will help you pull a data from a centralized location and implement it in part of the pipeline. And speaking of pipeline, let's talk about automation and shift left. So a lot of the organizations are doing all those validations on the CD level. What you actually want to do is that you want to shift left. You want to do it on the CI level. As soon as possible that you will provide the feedback, it will be better for your developers to fix it, because they still stay in the context of what's went wrong, and they will be more open-minded for that. It's even possible to even do it even earlier. You can actually do it on the local environment. Think about GitOps or other solutions that will help you do it. And if you follow the framework that I just showed you and implement it as soon as possible, I promise you it will prevent a lot of the mistakes that are happening. It will make you and your developers are both happy. So if you enjoyed this presentation and you want to also get a copy and you want to see all the tools and all the resources that I mentioned, it's all be listed on my GitHub repository, which is called Pink Bunny Ears. And now you understand why I have this ad, because I promise you, when you try to remember what is the name of the repository, you remember the idiot that wore pink bunny ears. And then you say, I know what is the name of the repository. So there you go. This is why I have those bunny ears. So good luck. And if you have any questions, feel free to open any issues on these repositories and I will reply immediately. Thank you.